The clock on the wall of Ryan Batista's office read exactly 7:30 p.m. when he finally pushed back his chair, shoving aside the pile of paperwork that had consumed him for hours. Another long, exhausting day. At 42, the millionaire businessman felt the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. His house, with its grand architecture and luxurious details, no longer felt like a home, just an empty refuge. His tired eyes scanned the room, but his mind was somewhere else. Somewhere far from business, deadlines, and endless obligations. This house was supposed to mean so much more, but all he felt inside it was loneliness. His kids were in another state, his wife had passed away 3 years ago, and for months now, his only company had been assistants and house staff. But there was one person he saw often. Someone who, despite not belonging to the high society he was used to, had somehow become a constant presence in his daily life. Emma, the housekeeper. She was 28, still young, but with a quiet strength that was impossible to ignore. She was always on the move, but her energy wasn't just about getting things done. It was different. Maybe it was the way she took care of the kids, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about them, or maybe just the calmness she carried as she went about her day. Ryan let out a deep breath, a rare hint of a smile crossing his face. Maybe it was time to take a break. He walked to the window, gazing out at the garden as the night slowly swallowed the last traces of daylight. The silence felt absolute, until a soft, polite voice echoed from the other side of the door. "Mr. Ryan, Miss..." Emma asked if you'd like to have dinner now. It was Abigail, the housekeeper who ran everything with quiet efficiency. She was attentive and organized, but her presence was never as noticeable as Emma's. No matter where she went, Emma left something behind, a feeling, a warmth that Ryan didn't quite understand. He turned toward the door where Abigail stood, her face neutral as always. "Yeah, tell Emma I'll be right down," he replied, his voice softer than he expected. Over the past few months, he'd noticed something he couldn't quite explain. How for some reason, he always felt more at ease when Emma was around. As he made his way down the stairs toward the dining room, his mind replayed the moments they had shared recently. He had tried, really tried, to ignore the little things. The way Emma always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. The way he caught himself watching her longer than necessary. But he always pushed those thoughts away. After all, what could a man like him, powerful, successful, with everything at his fingertips, possibly have in common with a housekeeper? The dining room was empty when he entered. Emma was at the far end, setting the table. She hadn't seen him yet, giving him a moment to just observe her. Her brown hair was pulled back into a simple bun, and her movements were smooth and efficient. When she finally turned and noticed him, her eyes lit up with a small, warm smile. "Good evening, Mr. Ryan. Dinner's almost ready," she said, her voice calm and polite, but with a softness that filled the air between them. Ryan simply nodded and took his seat. He wasn't sure why, but something about Emma's presence drew him in. It wasn't just her attention to detail or her work ethic. There was a lightness about her, something that contrasted sharply with the heavy, calculated life he lived. For a while, they talked like they always did, short, polite exchanges. Emma kept a respectful tone, and Ryan, usually distant, found himself paying closer attention to her words than he ever expected. The topics were ordinary, tomorrow's plans, the weather, but there was something unspoken in the air between them. A quiet tension, subtle but undeniable. After dinner, Ryan retreated to his office. His heart felt heavier than usual, his mind stuck on thoughts he didn't want to entertain. Emma. He had spent the entire day thinking about her, and that wasn't something he could just brush off. It didn't make sense. He was a businessman, used to analyzing everything with cold precision. And yet, as he sat down at his desk, he realized something that unsettled him even more. It wasn't the fact that Emma was a housekeeper that bothered him. It was the fact that he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something between them, something real, something he didn't know how to deal with. The next day started like any other, but something felt different in the air. Ryan couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest. His thoughts felt heavier than usual, stubbornly circling back to Emma. Her quiet smile, the softness in her voice. He tried to focus on work, on the important meeting he had that morning, but none of it seemed to matter compared to the growing restlessness inside him. As always, he woke up early, and before heading out, he made a quick stop in the kitchen. Emma was already there, preparing breakfast, focused on her task. But the moment she saw him, she glanced up and gave him a small smile. Simple, yet full, of meanings he couldn't quite decipher. He didn't respond right away, just gave a brief nod, the way he always did. But deep down, there was a part of him that wanted to say something more, something that went beyond their usual polite exchanges. Emma, on the other hand, had started noticing a shift. She had always been observant, but since she began working in Ryan's mansion, she couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something different about him. At first, she had focused on nothing but doing her job well, keeping her emotions out of it. But now, his presence lingered in her mind longer than she was willing to admit. Ryan, the powerful, distant man who seemed so far from her world, was somehow occupying a space in her thoughts she didn't expect. Breakfast passed in relative silence, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. Ryan was clearly distracted, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, while Emma moved through the kitchen with her usual ease, though she couldn't stop herself from stealing occasional glances at him. "Do you have any plans for tonight, Mr. Ryan?" she asked, breaking the silence. Without looking up from the cups she was arranging, Ryan raised his eyes, slightly caught off guard by the question. He rarely spoke about his personal life, and something about the way she asked, casual but laced with curiosity, made him feel strangely exposed. The way she said, "Mr. Ryan," unhurried, without any forced formality, made him feel like she was seeing him in a way most people didn't. "No, nothing planned. Why?" he asked, almost instinctively. The answer came out automatically, but his tone was different, more open than usual. He wasn't used to responding like that. Emma hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should continue the conversation. But curiosity, mixed with a feeling she couldn't quite name, pushed her forward. "I just thought maybe Miss Abigail could organize something, a small gathering, just for family. Something simple. I figured it might be nice for you to relax a little." Ryan looked at her more intently now. He hadn't planned any social events, let alone anything that involved his family in an informal setting. But the idea of a small, low-key evening, surprisingly, it didn't sound so bad. A tiny, nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that maybe Emma was right. Maybe something simple, without the pressure of a business dinner or a high-profile event, was exactly what he needed. "That's a good idea, Emma. I'll think about it," he replied, more out of politeness than real interest. And yet, he couldn't deny that there was something about her, something that made him reconsider things he wouldn't normally entertain. The rest of the day was filled with his usual business obligations, but Ryan's mind was elsewhere. No matter how much he tried to focus, he kept catching himself thinking about Emma. Every moment he spent in that mansion, with her around, he felt both uncomfortable and drawn in. What should have been just a professional relationship was becoming something else, something he wasn't sure how to handle. That night, Ryan ate dinner alone, as usual. The familiar silence of the mansion wrapped around him, but for some reason, it felt heavier than before. He finished his meal without much thought, but his mind was still stuck on her. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but Emma had a strange way of getting under his skin. And it wasn't just physical attraction, there was something deeper forming. On the other side of the house, Emma wrestled with her own thoughts. She knew the routine, she knew what was expected of her, but she never imagined that things between them would become this complicated. Ryan had always seemed distant, but now she could sense something else beneath the surface, a weight he carried. And the more she saw it, the harder it became to ignore the emotions building inside her. But she also knew the risk. If she let her feelings take control, she could lose everything she had worked for. She kept telling herself that this was just a job, nothing more. But with every passing day, that lie became harder to believe. As the night deepened, Ryan retreated to his office. His thoughts were tangled, but one thing was clear. He needed to figure out what the hell was happening to him. He was on the edge of something, a change, and somehow Emma, the housekeeper, had become the catalyst. But what unsettled him, most wasn't just the attraction, it was the growing suspicion that whatever was happening between them, it was real. And that terrified him. The day dawned gray, and the light rain falling over the city seemed to reflect Ryan's inner turmoil. He woke up with a sense of unease, as if something was about to change. Since last night, the thought of Emma hadn't left him. He had tried to distract himself with work, but the hours passed slowly, and with every moment, her memory seemed to grow more intense. As he went downstairs for breakfast, he found Emma, as usual, busy with the preparations. She stood by the counter, stirring something in a bowl, focused on her task, but as soon as she heard him approaching, she lifted her gaze. The smile she gave him was subtle, yet enough to send a small shiver down Ryan's spine. Emma seemed different. There was something in her eyes he couldn't quite define, a mix of curiosity and something deeper. "Good morning, Mr. Ryan. Breakfast is almost ready. Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice as kind as ever, but her gaze was more intense, as if she too was holding back some kind of emotion. Ryan took a little longer to respond. He felt the need to break the silence, but didn't know where to start. Something in his mind told him to act differently. What should have been a simple breakfast was beginning to feel more significant than it should have been. "Yes, Emma?" "You can bring me the coffee, please," he replied, his voice slightly softer than usual. He had never felt so uncomfortable, in his own home. She brought the coffee and stepped back a little, but not before casting a fleeting glance in his direction. Ryan could feel the tension in the air. They didn't usually talk about personal matters, but something seemed on the verge of changing. Maybe it was time to go beyond the professional facade. Ryan knew he couldn't ignore what was happening inside him. "Emma," he said, his voice a bit firmer now. "I need to ask you something." She stopped, her eyes locking onto Ryan's. For the first time, the woman who was always so careful with her words seemed hesitant, as if she knew this conversation wouldn't be like the others. "Yes, Mr. Ryan?" she asked, but her tone was more cautious. "Are you happy here?" "With your job, I mean," Ryan asked, the weight of his own question surprising him. He had never bothered to ask his employees about their feelings. They were there to do their job, nothing more. But somehow, with Emma, it was different. He wanted to know more. He wanted to understand what she thought, what she felt. Something in her gaze, in her posture, made him question everything he believed about his life. Emma remained silent for a moment. The look she gave Ryan was full of unspoken meanings. She knew her answer mattered, not just to him, but to herself as well. She wasn't just dealing with a boss. She was facing a man who, for some reason, made her heart race. I'm happy to be here, Mr. Ryan," she said, but her voice faltered slightly. She felt that answer wasn't entirely true. Of course, she was grateful for the job, for the opportunity to support her family and build a better life. But there was a part of her, a silent, hidden part, that felt something stronger, something she couldn't control. Ryan watched her closely, noticing the hesitation in her words. That small hesitation was enough to make him realize that Emma was more involved in the situation than she wanted to admit. He wondered what she thought about him. Did she see him only as her boss? Or was there something more behind her glances and gestures? "Emma, you know you can speak openly with me, right? You don't have to worry about formalities," he said, his tone softer, as if he were trying to reassure her. She looked at him, her face expressing a mix of emotions she couldn't hide. Emma knew there was something between them, something they were both trying to ignore, but that seemed to grow, stronger each day. She wanted to say something, but caution always held her back. She didn't want to risk losing her job, her stability. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the attraction she felt for him. "I don't know what to say, Mr. Ryan," she murmured, feeling the tension rise. "I just work here. That's all that matters." Ryan observed her, his eyes fixed on hers. He didn't know what was happening between them, but the intensity of the moment was becoming impossible to ignore. He wanted to know more about what she felt, but at the same time, he knew that crossing that line could change everything. What would happen if he were honest? If, instead of maintaining the professional facade, he started to explore the emotions, growing between them? He took a deep breath, as if trying to expel the confusion consuming him. Maybe, he thought, it would be better to take a step back. But something inside him, a voice whispering in the back of his mind, told him otherwise. He was lost in his own thoughts, caught between what he wanted and what he should do. That night, as he returned to the mansion, Ryan couldn't sleep. His mind was fixated on Emma, on the complexity of his feelings, on the words she hadn't said, and the look she had given him. The night felt endless, and he wondered if he could handle all of this, or if, somehow, he was stepping into a situation with no way back. The day dawned calm, but for Ryan, the weight of the previous night still lingered on his shoulders. He couldn't shake off the thoughts about Emma, the way she looked at him, the hesitation in her voice. It was strange how, in such a short time, her presence had affected him so much. He tried to focus on business, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in the reflection of Emma's eyes, the softness of her smile, the unspoken words that hung in the air. As he went downstairs for breakfast, he saw her once again, already prepared to attend to his needs. Emma was, as always, diligent and attentive, but there was something different about her, something he couldn't ignore. She was more withdrawn than usual, her eyes avoiding his, as if she knew there was something between them, something that could no longer be ignored. Emma noticed Ryan's presence even before he entered the kitchen. The silence between them was heavier than ever, but unlike previous times, she didn't know what to expect from him. Ryan's gaze was different. Not distant anymore, but observant, attentive. She felt her body tense as he approached. "Good morning, Emma," he said, his voice deeper than usual, making her lift her eyes. The greeting was not just formal. There was something more, a touch of closeness she had not identified until then. "Good morning, Mr. Ryan," Emma replied, but her voice trembled as if she were trying to maintain composure. She didn't know what he wanted, but she could no longer disguise how much things between them were changing. "How's the day going? Anything out of the ordinary?" Ryan asked, trying to sound natural, but his words carried a certain concealed anxiety. He felt lost, as if he were stepping into unknown territory, and yet he couldn't stop himself from continuing. Emma hesitated before answering, her mind still trying to process everything that had happened between them in the last few hours. The mere fact that he was showing more openness toward her unsettled her, but at the same time, she felt an inexplicable hope that something was about to change. She didn't know what, but she knew that something was on the verge of happening. "No, sir. Everything is as usual," she replied, but the smile she gave him was not the same as before. There was a hint of melancholy behind her words. She knew that things between them were different now. There was no going back. Ryan felt the absence of something in Emma's words. He observed her more attentively, capturing the details of her behavior. She was distancing herself from him, perhaps sensing that their relationship was about to take an unexpected turn, and that unsettled him even more. He was aware of the power she had over his thoughts, but at the same time, he felt a need to pull away, to not allow this to develop further. The fear of losing control over his own life was starting to take over his mind. "Emma," he began, his words hesitant. "I want you to know that you don't need to feel uncomfortable around me. We're just having a conversation, aren't we?" He tried to ease the tension in the air, but the words didn't come out as naturally as he would have liked. What should have been a simple interaction was turning into an emotional roller coaster for him. Emma lifted her gaze, trying to grasp the meaning behind his words. She knew he was trying to break the silence, but at the same time, she didn't know if she should allow this to be more than just a conversation between employer and employee. She wanted to respond, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. She no longer knew what to feel. There were moments when she wished everything were simpler, that she could continue with her routine without getting carried away by the intensity of the situation. "It's not easy, Mr. Ryan," Emma finally responded, her voice softer but filled with a raw sincerity that Ryan hadn't expected. "It's not easy to keep our distance when everything feels confusing." Those words echoed in Ryan's mind, making his chest tighten. He knew Emma was speaking the truth. The distance between them was shrinking, and not just physically. He could feel the thin line between reason and desire, between what he wanted and what he should do. He could no longer ignore what he felt, but he also didn't know how to act in the face of it. He was trapped in an emotional dilemma, struggling against a growing attraction that challenged everything he believed was right. "I don't want this to become a problem, Emma," he said, now with unexpected sincerity. "I just wanted to understand what's happening." Emma looked at him, her deep eyes filled with unspoken feelings. She knew what he meant, but she wasn't ready to hear it. She felt that by giving any answer, she would be opening a door to something irreversible, something that would change their lives forever. "I understand, Mr. Ryan," she responded with a sigh, lowering her head. "But maybe it's better if we don't talk about this anymore." Ryan watched her in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on him more than he had imagined. He wanted things to go back to the way they were before, but he knew that was no longer possible. What existed between them was inevitable now. That night, as silence enveloped the mansion, Ryan reflected on what was happening. He tried to convince himself that he was just going through a temporary phase, but he knew it wasn't true. He was falling for Emma, and that was something he didn't know how to control. The fear of losing control over his own life consumed him, but at the same time, he could no longer push away the idea that Emma might be the woman he had been looking for, even if it meant an irreversible change in everything he knew. The house was silent that morning. The rain kept falling, tapping against the windows with a calm persistence. Ryan was in his office trying to focus on the reports that had arrived the night before, but instead, his mind was fixated on Emma. He knew he could no longer ignore what was happening between them. Every fleeting glance, every subtle gesture from Emma made him feel like he was losing control of his own life. He kept trying to convince himself that he could move forward as usual, but that was becoming more impossible by the day. Emma, on the other hand, felt just as conflicted. The gentle smile she used to give her employer now carried an uncertainty she could no longer hide. She knew that her presence in the mansion was becoming more than just a professional duty. She could no longer deny the feelings that surfaced when Ryan was near, nor the times she found him in her thoughts throughout the day. She didn't know what to do about it. She was in unfamiliar territory, and with every step, she felt more vulnerable. That afternoon, as Emma prepared dinner, Ryan entered the kitchen without warning. His sudden presence startled her, and as she turned, their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, looking at each other, as if time had stopped and everything around them had disappeared. The tension in the air was palpable. Ryan felt the need to say something, but the words seemed trapped in his throat. "Emma," he began, his voice rough, but when he looked at her, he saw something in her eyes that made him pause. It wasn't just the hesitation from before. Now there was something deeper, something they both could no longer ignore. Emma interrupted, him not wanting to hear what he had to say. "Mr. Ryan, please, we don't need to talk about this. I've already said everything I needed to." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't want him to know how deeply he affected her. She didn't want to be vulnerable, but she felt there was no way to hide what was in her heart anymore. Ryan took a step closer, almost without realizing it, as if it was inevitable. "I can't ignore what's happening between us anymore. Emma," he said, his voice now carrying a sincerity she could no longer evade. "I know things aren't simple, but I can't just let this get lost in silence. I can't pretend that everything is fine when, in reality, everything is complicated." Emma took a step back, her heart pounding. She didn't want to hear those words. She didn't want to believe that he was feeling the same way. It only made everything harder. She knew that what was between them wasn't just fleeting attraction, it was more than that. But at the same time, Emma wasn't sure if she was ready to face the reality of her own emotions. She had been humiliated once before in her past life and didn't want to risk getting hurt again. She felt a mixture of fear and desire, an internal battle she couldn't win. "I can't do this, Mr. Ryan," Emma finally said, the words difficult to get out. "I can't let this happen. We can't let this happen." Ryan frowned, feeling the pain in her voice. He knew he was being impulsive, that emotions were speaking louder than reason, but he couldn't stop. "Emma, you don't understand. I can't live with this anymore, with this distance between us. I can't keep pretending I'm indifferent to you." Ryan's words hung in the air, vibrating with a silent intensity. Emma looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't know how to respond. She wanted to say something, but the words faded before they could come out. What she felt for him was obvious, but she was afraid to admit it, afraid of the consequences. There was too much at stake. She couldn't risk her life, her job, her security. She knew that if anything happened between them, everything would change. She wasn't sure if she was ready to handle that change. "I need time, Ryan. Time to think," Emma said, her voice barely audible but firm. "Please don't make me any promises we can't keep. I can't be part of this." She stepped away from him, and the distance between them felt like an abyss. Ryan watched her leave, feeling an emptiness grow inside him. He knew Emma was right. He couldn't continue down this path without considering the consequences. But at the same time, he couldn't just walk away from the woman who had stirred his feelings in a way no one ever had. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He was restless, consumed by thoughts of Emma. He knew he needed to give her space, but the desire to be near her, to understand what was truly happening between them, was too strong. He felt torn, between reason and desire, between what he knew was right and what his heart wanted. Emma couldn't sleep either. The silence of the house felt heavy, as if every thought she had was a weight she carried alone. She knew there was something between them, something that could no longer be ignored. But she also knew that giving in to these feelings could have devastating consequences. The internal battle she was fighting was leaving her exhausted. But in that moment, Emma knew she had to make a decision, and there was no turning back. The morning was especially cold, and the raindrops gently tapped against the window of the library, creating a soft rhythm that seemed to match the beating of Emma's heart. She was distracted, organizing some books, but her mind was far away. She couldn't shake off the thoughts of Ryan. What had happened between them? How had he, the man who seemed so distant, become someone so close? She felt a mix of confusion and desire, but also a deep fear. The fear of surrendering to an impossible love, of risking everything for something that might never work out. Ryan, on the other hand, couldn't concentrate on his thoughts either. He was lost in her. Emma was on his mind every second, like a soft song that wouldn't let him rest. He knew something was happening between them, but he could no longer ignore it. The distance between them was becoming unbearable, and he couldn't continue pretending. Everything was fine. He wanted to be near her, closer than ever. He needed to understand what this meant, for him and for her. That afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. He could no longer hide from his feelings. He knew Emma was avoiding his gaze, his words, but he also knew she felt something too, that she couldn't be indifferent to what was between them. He felt an irresistible urge to go to her, to break that distance, to understand everything that lay behind the heavy silence surrounding them. When he entered the library, the sound of his footsteps echoed like an alarm. Emma immediately looked up, and their gazes met. Ryan couldn't look away. What he saw in her was something he couldn't explain, something delicate, something that attracted him in an inexplicable way. He took a step toward her, without thinking, as if something inside him was urging him to act. "Emma." He spoke, his voice hoarse, laden with something she couldn't ignore. He had never said her name so intimately, but in that moment, it felt like the only right thing to do. Emma turned toward him, her eyes uncertain, but also filled with a silent expectation. "Mr. Ryan," she responded, trying to keep her distance, but her trembling voice betrayed what she was feeling. "I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't go on with this. I can't allow myself to get involved with you this way." Her words seemed to echo through the room, but Ryan didn't step back. He felt the weight of those words, but he also knew he couldn't continue like before. He needed to understand the truth. He needed to know if what was between them was real or just a fantasy. "I can't live with this doubt anymore, Emma." He stepped forward, one step after another, until he was right in front of her. His gaze was deep, sincere, as if he were trying to break through the barrier she had built between them. "I can't ignore what's happening anymore. I know you feel something, too, and I can't stay here pretending nothing has changed. I can't anymore." Emma instinctively stepped back, her heart racing. She didn't want to hear it, but at the same time, the pain of denial felt even stronger. She didn't want to be vulnerable. She didn't want to admit that what he was saying was true. But deep down, she knew he was right. Something had changed. Something deep. Something she couldn't control. "Ryan, please," she tried to say, but her voice broke. He took a gentle step forward, as if he knew this was the right moment. She closed her eyes for a moment, as though trying to protect herself from that closeness. But when she opened them again, her gaze met his, so close, so intense. "Emma." He whispered her name, like a prayer. The softness in the way he said it made her feel something she could no longer deny. He was there, not just as her employer, but as a man who desired her, who felt something for her. The pressure in her chest was almost unbearable. "I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to stay silent, distanced from you. I don't want to pretend nothing is happening between us. You feel the same, don't you?" Emma felt the heat of his body so close to hers. He lightly touched her arm, and that simple gesture was enough to make her heart beat faster. She had no words. She could no longer hide what was happening inside her. She knew it wasn't just attraction. It was something more, something deep. She wanted to give in, to surrender, but fear held her back. "I can't, Ryan," she said, her voice hoarse, almost a sigh. "I can't allow myself this. I can't give in to something that will destroy everything I've built here, my life. I can't." But he interrupted her, gently touching her face. His fingers caressed her skin, softly, almost reverently. "Emma, I'm not asking you to destroy anything. I'm asking you to give me a chance to make this right, a chance for us to be together." She looked at him, doubt and desire mixed in her eyes. The heat she felt was almost physical. He was touching her in ways she didn't know how to handle. Each word, each gesture of his seemed to invade her mind, her heart. She was on the verge of giving in. But before she could respond, Ryan leaned in toward her, his lips almost touching hers, and at that moment, Emma could no longer control herself. She closed her eyes, and he kissed her. The kiss was soft at first, cautious, as if both were testing the limits of something unknown. But soon, the tension they had both held back for so long exploded, and the kiss deepened, became more urgent. Emma surrendered to the moment, no longer resisting. It was as if, finally, everything she felt had been released from within her. There was no denying what was happening anymore. And in that kiss, she knew her life would change forever. When they pulled away, both gasping for air, Ryan looked at Emma with an intensity she'd never seen before. "I can't deny it anymore, Emma. I want you. I desire you, and I won't hide that anymore." She looked at him, and for the first time, she felt no fear. She knew the road ahead would be complicated, but now she no longer wanted to run. She wanted him too, more than anything, more than she had ever imagined. "I want you too, Ryan, but I don't know what to do with this." He smiled softly, touching her face with his fingertips. "We'll figure it out together." The next morning, the sun shone brighter than Emma had expected. She woke up with a strange feeling, a mixture of happiness and uncertainty. What had happened between her and Ryan the night before felt like a dream. Their kiss, the unspoken promise of a future together, still left her dizzy. But at the same time, fear consumed her. What did this mean for her? What did it mean for Ryan? She got out of bed and walked over to the window, gazing at the garden outside. Everything seemed the same, but at the same time, everything was different. She knew nothing could be the same anymore. Ryan had touched her heart in a way she didn't know was possible. But what would she do with that? How would she deal with the feelings that had grown inside her so quickly and overwhelmingly? When she reached the living room, he was already there, waiting. The scene was different now. Ryan was no longer the distant and inaccessible man she had seen for so long. He was sitting at the table, waiting for her, with a calm and welcoming smile. But inside, he too felt the weight of what had happened. The kiss, the closeness, the sincerity of their feelings. Everything had changed the course of their lives. Forever. He couldn't go back, and he knew Emma couldn't either. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft and filled with a sweetness Emma had never heard before. She smiled shyly, still feeling the energy between them pulsating in the air. "Good morning," she replied, her voice quieter than she wanted. She didn't know what to do with the whirlwind of emotions that rushed through her. "We need to talk, don't we?" Ryan looked at her with understanding. "Yes, Emma, we do. But before anything else, I just want to tell you one thing. I know everything has changed, and I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to make this work, if you are too." Emma hesitated for a moment, looking at him, feeling the weight of his words. She knew he spoke sincerely, but she also knew that what they were beginning to experience was not simple. She wasn't just a woman falling in love with her employer. She was Emma, and what she felt for him now made her question everything she knew about herself. She had surrendered to the moment, to the kiss, to the idea of a future with him, but doubts still haunted her. There was more at stake than just their hearts. "Ryan," she started, her voice firmer now, trying to push away the uncertainty. I really don't know what to do with this. I want to believe that we can be happy together, but what is this going to mean for us? What is this going to mean for my life here, with work, with everything I've built so far? I can't lose control." He stood up from the chair and moved, stepped closer to her, his steps silent but purposeful. He stopped in front of her and looked deeply into her eyes, trying to convey the sincerity he felt. "I don't want you to lose anything, Emma. Nothing. I just want you to give me a chance to show you how much you mean to me. I know what we have is not simple. I know there's a lot more at stake, but I can't deny what I feel for you. I'm willing to face all of this, as long as you let me show you how different it can be." Emma felt the warmth of his words penetrate her skin. She looked at him for a long moment, feeling the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She knew, in some way, that what they were beginning to live had no turning back. No matter what she did, there was no longer a way to ignore what was between them. The love that had emerged seemed greater than the concerns and fears she carried. "I also want to try, Ryan," she said, her voice a little lower but full of determination. "But it won't be easy. It will be hard for me to accept this. I don't want this to change everything I've built. And more than that, I don't want to hurt you. I don't want you to regret this. I don't want us to lose the reason behind what we're feeling." He smiled, gently touching her face, as if he wanted to transfer all the calm he was feeling to her. "We'll figure this out together, Emma. There's no formula for love. There's just the willingness to make it work, and I want to make it work with you." They stood in silence for a moment, gazing at each other, the tension between them, stronger than ever. But something changed. Something in Emma, in that instant, warmed. She knew there were risks, knew there were obstacles ahead, but something in Ryan's gaze made her believe that, with him by her side, she wouldn't have to face them alone. I want you, Ryan. More than I'd like to admit," she said, her voice almost imperceptible, but full of a sincerity she could no longer hide. He then embraced her, with the gentleness of someone who had finally found what he was looking for, with his heart tight, but at peace with his choice. "I want you too, Emma, and together we'll make this work." In that embrace, words were no longer needed. There was no need for them to speak. The feeling they both shared, now declared, said more than any words could express. They were ready to face whatever came their way, knowing the path would be long, but together. The next day was tense, but also filled with something Emma couldn't describe. There was a lightness in the air, but at the same time, she felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff. The kiss, the words, Ryan's touch, all of that was alive inside her, but the fear of what would come next wouldn't let her rest. She felt that something was about to happen, that reality was going to demand more than she was willing to give. While Emma tidied the house, her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't concentrate. Her heart raced whenever she remembered Ryan's face, how he had looked at her with so much desire and sincerity. She knew it wasn't just passion. There was something deeper, something real. But what did that mean for her, for him, for their future? She couldn't predict it. Ryan was in his office, dealing with the business matters he had set aside in recent days. Even though he was a businessman, he felt a certain anxiety about what was happening between him and Emma. He wanted her to see that what he felt wasn't just a fling. He wanted to make this work. However, what he didn't expect were the weight of the responsibilities that would come with this relationship. That afternoon, he decided to talk to Emma again. He didn't want to delay the conversation any longer. He knew that their relationship wasn't simple, and he wanted to be prepared for whatever would come next. He wanted a clear answer, even if it meant they would face the challenges ahead together. When he entered the room, Emma was standing by the window, staring at the horizon with her arms crossed. She seemed distant, deep in thought. He didn't know what was going on in her mind, but he knew she was dealing with something far bigger than she was willing to admit. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity she couldn't ignore, "we need to talk. About us." She turned to face him, her eyes tired, but also full of a quiet energy. "I know, Ryan, I know. But I don't know what to say. I don't know where to begin." He approached her, giving her space to speak, but also trying to make it clear that he was there, ready to listen. "I don't want you to feel pressured, but I can't continue with this uncertainty. I need to know where we're headed. I know things between us aren't simple, but I'm willing to make it work. I just need to know if you are too." Emma felt the weight of his words. She knew he was being sincere, that he was asking for something more. But the fear of losing, the stability she had built, paralyzed her. She wanted to surrender to him. She wanted to believe in what she felt, but the fear that everything might fall apart kept her from moving forward without hesitation. "Ryan, she began, but the words got stuck in her throat. "I want you more than I can express, but I don't know if I'm capable of handling all of this. You're the owner of this house. You're my employer. I know there's so much at stake, and I don't want you to regret choosing me." He looked at her with affection, touching her face with his hands, as if he wanted her to see the sincerity in his eyes. "I don't regret choosing you, Emma. I chose you because deep down, I've always known you were more than just my employee. You're an incredible woman, and I want to be by your side. It doesn't matter what others think or what the world says. What matters is what the two of us feel." But Emma felt the weight of reality hit hard. There were so many issues to resolve. She didn't want to put Ryan in a difficult position. She didn't want to be the reason he lost his image or his position. She knew that what they were living wasn't something easily accepted by others. Society, his family, the people around him, all of it seemed like an almost impossible obstacle to overcome. "Ryan, I'm not naive. I know that our relationship could be a scandal. I know what others will think. Are you willing to face all of this for me?" She looked at him with an intensity that made him stop. "Because I can't be the reason you lose everything you have. I can't be the one who destroys your life." He then embraced her, without saying a word. He didn't need to say anything. Her words were harsh, but he knew what she was feeling. Emma was afraid of losing everything, but he had no doubts about what he wanted. He wanted her, and he was willing to fight for that love against all obstacles. "Emma, I choose you. I know our relationship won't be easy, but I want you by my side, and it doesn't matter what the world thinks. We'll face it together." She felt her heart warm, but at the same time, the insecurity continued to consume her. There was so much more to consider. She knew this decision would completely change their lives, but the love she felt for him, that intense desire to be with him, made her think that maybe it was time to take the risk. I want you to, Ryan, but I need time to think, to understand what this means for me, for us." He looked at her with a gentle smile, still holding her hands. "I'll give you all the time you need, Emma, but I want you to know I'm ready. When you're ready, we'll be together." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision. The love was there, right in front of her, but the consequences of her choice were still uncertain. She didn't know if she was ready to face everything that would come, but one thing she knew: Ryan's love was the truest thing she had ever felt. The following days were a whirlwind. Emma felt like her life, which had been well organized and controlled, was slowly crumbling. The idea of being with Ryan warmed her from the inside, but the external reality was relentless. His words, his promises of love, continued to echo in her mind, but the pressure of real life seemed to suffocate her. Ryan, on the other hand, was more determined than ever. He no longer wanted to hide what he felt. He no longer wanted to live with the weight of denying his emotions. But he knew that for this to work, he would have to face many adversities. It wasn't just their status or the differences between their worlds that separated them. There were people who would do anything to keep them apart. That afternoon, he went to his mother's house to talk about what was happening. He knew his mother wouldn't be easily convinced, but he didn't want to hide the truth anymore. Emma was in his life, and he didn't want to live with the secret. He had to be honest, not just with her, but also with his family. But what he didn't know was that his mother wasn't willing to accept their relationship. "Ryan, you can't be serious," his mother said, with an incredulous expression. "This woman, you know what she is, don't you? She's just an employee here. There's no future in something like this. I raised you to be more than that, son." Her words hit him like a sharp blade, but he couldn't back down, not when he was so sure of what he felt. "Mom, I love her, and she's an incredible woman, much more than you think. I won't let anyone, not even you, make me believe that what we have is wrong." She looked at him, disappointment clear in her eyes. "Ryan, you're an intelligent man. You have a bright future ahead of you. Don't let this fantasy destroy everything you've built. You can have someone on your level, someone who deserves your love, not this woman." He took a deep breath, knowing the conversation was far from over. But he also knew he couldn't let his mother's words define what he wanted for his life. "I won't give up on Emma. I won't leave her for anything. I can't do that." The argument between them lasted for hours, but nothing his mother said would make Ryan change his mind. He knew the decision was made, and he was willing to face whatever was necessary to be with Emma. But what he didn't know was that this wouldn't be the last difficult conversation he would have about their relationship. Meanwhile, Emma, in her own home, tried to focus on work, trying to distract herself from her inner doubts. She loved Ryan, but she knew the complications were only just beginning. She didn't want him to be pressured into making decisions against his will. She didn't want to be the reason he stepped away from everything he had built. When Ryan returned home, he found her in the living room, looking thoughtful. He watched her for a moment, noticing how distant she seemed. He approached and sat beside her, holding her hands. "Emma," he said softly, "the conversation with my mom wasn't easy. She doesn't understand, but I won't let that affect us. What we have is real, and that's what matters." Emma looked at him, her eyes showing a mix of apprehension and love. "Ryan, you don't have to sacrifice everything for me. I don't want you to lose your family, your position. I know what this means to you. I know this could be the end of everything you've built." He squeezed her hands, as if trying to convey all the confidence he felt. "No, Emma. I choose you, and I won't let anyone keep us apart. I won't let anything destroy what we're building." She sighed, the anguish in her chest mixed with a deep desire to be by his side. "But you know it won't be easy. There are so many things that could go wrong, Ryan. People will talk, your family, your career. Are you willing to risk all of that?" Ryan looked at her with an intensity she had never seen before. "Emma, it's not about risking. It's about choosing what really matters, and what matters is being with you. I don't regret what I'm feeling. I don't regret being with you, and I'm willing to fight for us." Emma felt the warmth of his words, and for the first time in days, something inside her calmed. She knew their journey wouldn't be easy, but something in Ryan's gaze gave her the strength to move forward. She knew that together, they could face any obstacle. "I love you, Ryan," she said, her voice firm, full of conviction. "I love you too, Emma," he replied, kissing her forehead gently. "Nothing will tear us apart." But what they didn't know was that the coming days would bring new challenges, and the pressure of their choices would weigh even more heavily on their shoulders. But for now, they were together. And that was what mattered. The gentle morning breeze caressed Emma's face as she walked through the garden of Ryan's mansion. It was a cold morning, but the sense of renewal in the air seemed to bring her a calm she hadn't felt in a long time. The time she had spent reflecting on their relationship, the choices and the consequences had been long, and now, more than ever, she felt that the final decision was about to be made. Since the moment she had confessed her feelings to Ryan, The reality of the complications and external obstacles had never been easy to bear. The disapproval of her family, the judgment of others, all of that weighed on her. But when she looked at the love she shared with Ryan, she knew that what they were living was real, and it couldn't be destroyed by mere conventions. Inside the house, Ryan sat in the living room, deep in thought. He knew that today would be the decisive moment. The pressure was everywhere, and he knew that by making this choice, he would have to be prepared to give up some things. What troubled him the most, however, was the fear that Emma would distance herself from him. He didn't want her to be a victim of his decision, nor did he want her to feel pressured into staying with him out of obligation. "Emma," he said, seeing her enter the room, his voice gently tinged with nervousness. "Can we talk?" She approached him, her gaze reflecting the same intensity. "Of course, Ryan. I needed to talk to you, too." Both of them knew that this moment couldn't be postponed. The tension was in the air, and the love they felt for each other was about to be tested in a way neither of them had anticipated. I know we're facing many difficulties," Ryan began, looking directly into Emma's eyes. "But I don't want to live with this fear anymore. I don't want you to feel like you have to carry the weight of decisions that aren't yours. I love you, Emma, and she interrupted with a soft smile, but with a firmness he hadn't expected. "I love you too, Ryan. But I have to be honest with you. I've been thinking a lot about all of this, about us, about what's best for both of us. I know you love me, and I also know how important this is to you. But I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you have, everything you've worked for." He moved closer, holding her hands tightly. "No, Emma, you don't understand. What we have is more important than everything I've ever built. It doesn't matter what others say or what my family thinks. I choose you, and there's nothing that will make me change that." Emma looked at him, feeling a pang in her heart. It was clear to her that Ryan was willing to risk everything to be with her, but she didn't want to be the cause of his downfall. She knew he had so much to lose, so much to risk. The last thing she wanted was to see Ryan suffer because of her. "Ryan, I need time. I need to know what's best for us. What's best for you," she said, her voice trembling but firm. I can't let you give up everything for me. I can't." He looked at her, the pain in his eyes becoming even more evident. "I'm not giving up anything, Emma. I'm just choosing to live in a way that makes me happy. And you are my happiness. I don't want to lose you. I won't lose you." But Emma's pain was clear. She didn't want him to have to choose between her and his life. She wanted to give him the freedom to live without pressures, without the burden of guilt for his choices. I don't know what to do, Ryan. I love you, but I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. I can't live with that." He hugged her, holding her tightly, trying to convey all his determination to her. "You don't understand. Emma, nothing else matters except us. It doesn't matter what the world thinks. It doesn't matter what my family or others say. What matters is that we're together. And I'll do anything to make sure that continues." The kiss they shared was full of overwhelming passion. A kiss that didn't need words, because both of them knew exactly what the other felt. Emma closed, her eyes feeling the certainty that their relationship, with all its challenges, was still more important than anything else. But at the same time, the weight of the decision was on her shoulders. She knew a choice had to be made, and this choice would change their lives forever. That night, as the sky darkened outside, Emma finally made her decision. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, that the struggle would be constant. But the strength of the love they shared couldn't be ignored. She knew that, despite everything, she was ready to take the risk. Because deep down, Emma knew that true love, like theirs, shouldn't be sacrificed for conventions or fear. "I choose you, Ryan," she said, her eyes full of an emotion he never imagined he would see. "I choose us." Those were the final moments of uncertainty. From that day on, they began to live according to their choices. The battle was just beginning, but their love became the pillar on which they would build their future. And together, they were ready to face any obstacle fate placed in their path.